Mr. Jonathan Fields, I have to tell you, I feel like a little girl, 13-year-old about to see Justin Bieber. That is how much time you and I have spent together with your podcast, with your words. Thank you, thank you, thank you for making the time to be here with our tribe and our community today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And I have to share what an authentic, good, purpose driven human you are with our tribe. So, in our world, it can quickly become about WIFM. What's in it for me? And there is this thing, before you have a podcast guest on where you ping and you say, "Hey, what are you trying to promote? What's your call to action? What do we want to push? Is it a book? Is it a course? What are you doing?" And this is what Jonathan Bet said back to me, y'all. Reason number 787 why I love this man. There's nothing I want to push. I just hope that I give your audience an act of service, one nugget. And I think that just speaks to the core of your human being. So thank you.
Oh, well, that is the ultimate aspiration for me, right? To just show up and see if we can create value for those who are tuning in. I mean, your listeners, your viewers are giving us an hour of their lives, so let's honor that.
I love that. Have you, as someone who hand raised is a type A personality to my core, addicted to achieving, addicted to hitting the next checklist, always feeling like I need to be in control. Have you always had this sort of, I'm just going to show up and show up the best way I can and see what happens? Have you always had that mentality or has that emerged over time?
That's an interesting question. I'm still very driven.
Mhm.
So, do I show up every day and hope to just, bring my whole self to whatever it is that I'm doing? And that might be my role as a dad, as a husband, that might be my professional pursuits, whatever it may be. Um, that is definitely sort of like the leading indicator for me. But at the same time, I'm very much a futurist, and
Mm.
I always have big visions and big dreams and big goals that I'm constantly striving towards. So I do the dance between, not wanting to forfeit the grace of every day in the name
Mm.
of something big, but at the same time, I do hold big visions and ideals of what I want to achieve, what I want to create, how I want to serve, pretty close to my heart also. So I wouldn't say I'm a type A, but I'm pretty committed to whatever it is that I say yes to. And that can sometimes be really big things. And I'm also just equally committed to not sacrificing, like each little breath, each little moment, each little step along the way.
Oh, I love that. You are already taking me to church, my friend, a few minutes in. So, as you were talking beautifully about being in the moment and whatever that looks like, big or small, it makes me think about these buzzwords, right? We love a good buzzword in the US, don't we? And it seems ambiguous, it seems hard to navigate through. And one word I keep hearing is be where your feet are. And I really struggle with that, Jonathan, because my brain, I feel like there's 75 tabs open in it at any given time. And it's like ping, 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 ping. How do you air quote be where your feet are? How do you be in the moment? Are there any tips or tricks or things that you've done to learn to close some of the tabs in your brain?
Yeah, there are probably a couple things that I would offer up. But hands down, there's one giant lever that that has really been transformative for me, and that's a mindfulness practice. So I've been a daily meditator for about a dozen years now. And I didn't come to the practice because I wanted to. I didn't come to it because there was chatter spinning in my head and I wanted to be more grounded, more present. I came to it because in March of 2010, I woke up with a sound in my head that was a high pitched, almost like electronic siren going on, and came to learn in the weeks after it that the sound didn't exist outside. It was actually being generated by my brain. And a lot of people actually have some version of this called tinnitus or tinnitus. And for a lot of people, they just naturally habituate to it. They move on and everything's fine. There's another subset of people who it becomes massively destructive to every waking moment of their lives. And that was me. I was not able to handle it well at all. I literally opened my eyes in the morning to the extent that I could even sleep anymore because the evenings were brutalizing because the din of whatever was around me would drop away and I would just be consumed by this sound. Um, and uh, Basically, all of my energy was spent trying to just not hear the thing. It's like that classic thing, like don't focus on the, like 2,000 pound elephant in the middle of the room. That was my 2,000 pound elephant. And I tried everything, modern medicine really doesn't have any solutions for it. And at some point, people are just like, deal with it. And some people do, and some people don't, and some people go to really extremes. Um, I was finding myself going to a very dark place. And on a whim, I happened to be working on a book then, which was focused on uncertainty, how people navigate high stakes, sustained levels of uncertainty. And part of that research was taking me deep into the world of mindfulness and also CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I started also, some of that research led me down the path of chronic pain and how people actually are integrating mindfulness and CBT to actually be able to move with chronic pain where the stimulus that's generating the pain is there and maybe will be there for life. You've done everything you can to make it as, like as inconsequential as possible, but it's still there. And this blend of mindfulness and CBT for a lot of people actually is incredibly powerful because it allows them to acknowledge the fact that this thing exists that they really wish wouldn't, but it is. It's just part of your reality. And then instead of amplifying the signal of that pain by constantly devoting your attention to it, not willfully, but just because you can't not focus on it when it's so ever present, it amplifies it and it deepens it and it deepens the suffering around it. And CBT and mindfulness can be a really powerful, I wouldn't say antidote or certainly not cure, but it allows you to rewire your brain in a way that lets you coexist with this source of pain. And sometimes even befriend it, and sometimes even find um, a place as a teacher in your life. And for me, I said, well, that's kind of interesting. Somehow I wandered down this research path while working on a book. It led me to this. And I wondered whether it would work for the sound that was in my head. And I found myself a former rock drummer who is also a mindfulness based cognitive therapist who also had tinnitus and basically went in and asked him, could this work? And his answer was, yeah, it could. And then he told me the basic instructions. I kind of knew the instructions before that because in a previous life, I had actually owned a yoga center and taught yoga and meditation for 7 years. So he sent me on my way. And it took a lot of work. It took a blend of practicing that, doing my own kind of exposure therapy, harnessing breathing exercises from yoga to keep bringing myself back to a calm and centered place when I would immerse myself in the sound and just let it wash through me. But there was a moment a couple of months in where I realized that I was just trying to make the sound effectively my mantra, and my focus drifted away from it. And that was an unlock key for me because I realized that I could have this thing going on in my life. I could intentionally being trying to direct my attention to it, and actually wasn't able to sustain it. Like I could actually let it go. And a dozen years later, that practice has sustained as a daily practice for me. First, because I had this constant reminder of where I can go when I don't have the practice. Second, because it took me from a very dark place to baseline okay. And third, because from that place, the practice has really changed the way I move through my life. And using your language, allowed my feet to be present in the moment. It allows me to kind of zoom the lens out much more easily and ask myself, like what's actually going on here on three levels. Like both internally, what's happening with the chatter in my head. Um, on an interrelational level, what's actually happening in any given social dynamic between me and another person, another group of people, a massive crowd, if that's who it is. And then on a third level, just a level of sort of ambient awareness. What's happening just in the fabric of the energy, the environment around me. And then rather than get caught up in any one of those three domains, just kind of come back to being present, letting go of the chatter, letting go of any assumptions or tension that I associate with the relationship, letting go of, the need to have to lock on to anything that's going on in my environment, observing it, acknowledging it, um, taking whatever insight and information I can from it, and then just sort of like being with it and not grasping. And that's probably the a lot of the non-grasping part is in part the training of mindfulness and in part some of my study in Buddhism, some of the ideas from that. So this is a really long-winded answer, but that practice for me has been life-changing now because it allows me to be just so much more present. I mean, I can, if I catch myself, like having coffee with my wife and I realize I'm like kind of snappy, I'll rather than being like, oh, like there's something going on here. I must be upset with, her or a business relationship or a call that I'm having. I can much more easily just kind of zoom the lens out and be like, is there actually any rational basis for me behaving this way right now? Like, what am I actually responding to here? And realize I'm just being an idiot. Like I had 3 hours of sleep last night, maybe because I was up late working on a project or a deadline. I'm kind of cranky. I haven't had coffee yet. I'm low on chocolate, which is my blood type. Um, and it allows me to just kind of be like, you know what? Just chill out a little bit. Or maybe if I'm sort of like know that I'm stepping into a day not well equipped to be measured and kind and deliberate, then just spend more time on my own. And so the practice has really transformed just the way I step into my lives and my relationships.
Jonathan, you said so many beautiful things there. And one of the things that I took away, I took so many things, but one of the things was that this has become over a decade process for you. And I think we are so quick to want to try it once. It doesn't work. Well, it didn't work for me. So yeah, and we go back to these old habits because they're familiar and they're easy. And I also loved how you talked about also the awareness. I think awareness is such a gift and we don't give that enough street cred. Like we think we just need to be perfect. It needs to get fixed right away. Amazon our lives. And I would love your feedback, your viewpoint for our listener right now that is like, you know what? I'm glad that worked for you, Jonathan. I'm glad that worked for you. I can't do mindfulness. I don't even know where to start. Where is a place that they can even start to begin their own mindfulness process?
Yeah, well, it probably makes sense to also just speak to what I'm talking about when I talk about mindfulness. You can think about it in two ways. One is a dedicated practice. The second is just the way that you want to live your life. So you don't practice so that you're, the 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 intention of sitting down for mindfulness practice isn't to get better at practicing mindfulness when you're on the mat. It's to get better at being mindful when you're off the mat, you move into your days and your life. So like I want to be mindful in my life. That's why I do it. I want to be present in my life. That's why I do it. I want to let go of the things that spin in my head that aren't constructive or healthy. That's why I do it. I want to actually have the cognitive and creative and emotional bandwidth to be present in the things that aren't constructive in my life, to be mindful of all of that. So the aspiration isn't to like be the best meditator. It's just so that when you step away from that daily practice, it it informs like without you having to kind of like be intentional about it. It just becomes a part of the fiber of your being, the way you move through life. And that takes time, like you said, that takes years. There's no shortcut that I'm aware of. There's no technology that helps make that happen more quickly. So then the seated practice or the standing practice, however you decide to do it, is the what's so interesting is that the instructions are really, really simple. Almost anywhere that you go that you would learn a mindfulness practice, you'll hear some version of sit in a quiet, comfortable place, um, take a few deep breaths, close your eyes or open them, whatever's comfortable for you. Allow your attention to settle on the sensation of your breath. Maybe it's at the tip of your nose. Maybe it's as it moves down the back of your throat. Maybe you just sense the temperature of it. Maybe it's in your chest. You can feel it expanding and relaxing down. Maybe it's in your belly. You can feel it opening out and then pulling back in. Whatever's most accessible to you. And then just allow your attention to stay with that. So the instructions are ridiculously simple. The actual doing of it for most people who sit down can be brutally hard. And the reason isn't necessarily that it's brutally hard. The reason, there are two reasons. One, the typical attention span right now, I was just talking to a researcher about this recently. The typical screen based attention span these days is 46 seconds. The typical attention span off screen is actually a fraction of that. So we have so much trouble actually holding attentiveness to anything. And that's good things and bad things. We actually are much better at holding them attentiveness to bad things because it's sort of like based on more of a threat survival response. So good things or simple things or basic things, we're really terrible at holding our attention to it. And certainly like modern life hasn't made it any easier with a ton of distractions and technology. Um, so we take that lack of skill and attentiveness, and this is a skill. It's not something that we're just born with or not. It's something that you train. Um, and then we overlay an expectation that like we're pretty good at most other things in life. I checked a whole lot of boxes in my life, in my career, in my relationships, in my health, and all the yada yada. I should be able to check this box. I mean, come on, just sitting here focusing on my breath. How easy could that be? And then when 8 seconds in, you actually can't do it because your brain actually hasn't developed the skill of holding your attention for longer than that. The expectation that you should be able to do it layers shame into the process and frustration and futility. And then you start to like spin and you're like, the third time in 30 seconds where you catch yourself with, completely drifting somewhere else, then you just start to layer all sorts of, like mental chatter on top of it. And then you make yourself feel bad. And you tell yourself you're a failure. And then you tell yourself, this isn't for me. I can't do it. Um, and most of us just kind of tap out then. And you layer that onto the understanding that this is not an immediate intervention. This is not a momentary thing where like you're going to do it and then 60 seconds later you'll feel better. This is a months long or a years long process. And, in addition to the reduction of our attention spans, we also have a dramatically shortened perspective in terms of our expectations about results. Everything is instant, everything is now. If it's not done in like the flick of a finger, then it can't be valid or real. We don't think long term and we don't invest in anything that's long term anymore. Then it's sort of like the perfect storm of saying, well, like, this isn't for me. It doesn't work for me. It's not effective. When in fact, it works for everybody. It is effective for everybody and it is possible and accessible for everybody. The problem isn't that it's not for you. The problem is that we've stepped into the process with irrational and unrealistic expectations. And we hold ourselves to a standard of being able to, quote, achieve mindfulness that's just completely unrealistic and becomes demoralizing really quickly when it doesn't happen. So, first, I think you need to just reset expectations and know that there's no such thing as a person where this practice isn't accessible and valuable. If you start from that place and then you say, okay, so this can actually help Um, and then you reset the expectation to say, like, I'm going to sit, and my only expectation is I'm going to sit. And then instead of saying I'm going to do it for 20 minutes, I'm going to do it for 20 seconds today. And instead of saying I'm going to focus and I'm going to achieve attention for 20 seconds and not drift away, just say, like, I have no idea. I could drift away 10 times in 20 seconds, and that is 100% fine. That is actually the practice. And if in that 20-second window, you find yourself drifting and you barely are able to actually focus on your breath one time, that's actually okay. That is the practice. Because the practice isn't just about focusing. The practice is also about learning over time when you've lost focus, and then intentionally dropping whatever it is that has taken your focus away, and then choosing to return to whatever it is that you're, like, bringing your attention to, which for most people is the breath. So, and that can happen. I'm 12 years into this practice. I meditated this morning, and I was probably spinning for 18 of my 25 minutes in practice. So it, you know, it takes time. And there are days where I'm really dialed in, and there are days where I'm completely not dialed in. There's too much going on. I'm tired, or whatever it may be. So forgive yourself. The fact that you are not instantly perfect, and that you don't have instant results, and that it just takes time to do this thing. And so create kinder expectations toward yourself. Start really, really, really simple and short, literally 20, 30 seconds. Then every day, maybe add 5 seconds, and then 5 seconds the next, 5 seconds the next. And in the beginning, you may think to yourself, well, 20 seconds, it couldn't possibly be effective. And you're right. But what you're doing is you're actually training yourself to develop the habit of sitting and doing the thing. And then over time, once you create the container for the habit, the behavior inside that container, by adding 5 seconds a day, the behavior itself starts to expand to a point where a couple of weeks, couple of months in, you start to realize, oh, like I've got 2 or 3 minutes of this thing in. And for 30 of those seconds, I was really dialed in on my breath, and that felt pretty cool. And then 3 months in, you start to realize I'm doing this 5 days, 5 minutes a day feels really pretty good. I actually look forward to it. And the weirdest thing happened. Like, I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon from a client who was really upset. And instead of just like freaking out myself and being reactive and arguing, or just blaming myself and shutting down, I, I just kind of listened quietly and calmly, took a beat, and was able to respond deliberately rather than reactively. And like, that wasn't really accessible to me. So it's really about a shift in perspective and expectations, and understanding that it's a practice that really anyone can step into, but we have to understand how to step into it in a more forgiving way. Does that make sense to you?
Oh my God. I feel within those past few moments, Jonathan, that you unpacked my 39 years of living on this earth and a decade worth of therapy in a very beautifully easy, nugget packed conversation. And as you're sharing these words and in laying it out so beautifully and poetically, it just makes me think, when you look back at your own life and your own journey, I think our listeners would be very intrigued and surprised to know that you actually had a past in law. It's been a 25-year journey that you've been through. You mentioned you had a yoga studio. Like, do you look back at your childhood and the things that you were curious with, and find that this path, this calling that you're on, this work that you're doing now, it was always sort of meant to be your truth? Like, you always had this sort of inquisitive nature on the why and the thoughts and these sorts of things. Have you given yourself a moment to really look at your journey and the building blocks to get here?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the two animating forces for me to really invest effort in anything since I was a kid are the opportunity to create something from nothing,
Mm.
and the sort of like the quest to figure out like complex problems. And thankfully, like those two things tend to happen together. Like the bigger the stakes, the more complex the things that you make are. There's more to figure out. So, that showed up when I was a little kid, by me begging my parents to drive the old Chevy Blazer down to the junkyard in the town that I grew up in, throw old discarded bike parts into the back of the truck, come home and take a wad of duct tape and just piece them together as Franken bikes and ride them around the neighborhood until they spontaneously combusted, which usually didn't take very long. um, and it's threaded through my life. I am first and foremost a maker. Like the the opportunity to make something from nothing, has been the central driver for me to say yes to things from the earliest days. And whether it's bikes, whether it's, I was a painter as a kid also, which I'm slowly returning to as an adult now, as an artist, a designer. I started building businesses when I was in college and have continued to build a number of those. And whether it's brands, whether it's books, whether it's media, whether it's experiences, the opportunity to basically come up with something, just an idea, start with like something, just a concept, um, and then make that real, make that manifest in the world, and then potentially create something that is not just an expression of my maker impulse, but also you know affects people in a meaningful way.
Mm,
If I can function at that sweet spot, that's pretty awesome too, and that's been there from the earliest days.
I love that. As you're talking, it makes me think about this word purpose and how we feel like it's something you can just go on Amazon and purchase, right? We're so hungry to find out what is it? How do I get it? And I would love to know in your journey, in your work, what does the word purpose mean to you?
Hmm. So purpose is such a loaded word for a lot of people. um, Interestingly, there's actually a lot of academic research on purpose. In the literature, they phrase it as purpose in life,
Mm,
um, and they don't phrase it as life purpose the way that a lot of pop psychology does. I think it's an acknowledgement of the fact that we can derive a sense of purpose from a lot of different things. Um, Classically, like there's that old line, love and work, love and work. That's where it comes from. And it's not entirely untrue. But purpose is this sense that purpose is a verb. Purpose is a sense that you're moving towards something that is deeply meaningful to you.
mm,
It compels you to get up in the morning. It compels you to work hard. It compels you to push through challenges and obstacles, internal and external. It compels you to you know, keep striving for something, um, that is really meaningful to you. And there's a distinction I make because I think you can strive for things that are big and complex where the stakes are high, but if they're not actually personally meaningful to you, it's a lot less likely that you'll have a sense of purpose. You may have a sense of accomplishment, but accomplishment and purpose are not the same thing. You can check really big boxes off of a list, but if it's a box that you don't particularly care about and is not deeply meaningful to you, if it doesn't matter, you may not have a really strong sense of purpose associated with that. And it's really important that we have a sense of purpose in life because there's actually a mountain of research that shows that when you have a sense of purpose, it affects not just your mental health, but also your physical health, your risk for mortality, from heart disease, from stroke, your risk for inflammation, your risk for illness, all dramatically goes up. And the opposite is true. When you have a really strong sense of purpose, like the risk for all of those things goes down. And when you have no sense of purpose, the risk for all of them goes up. You know, Purpose gives you much stronger outcomes in performance oriented measures in the workplace, which we know too. So to me, it's a really important thing to find. And the good news here is that while some say that we all have a single life purpose, and like that is the only thing that we can do for life, I actually don't believe that,
mm,
and the research doesn't support it. The research supports that a lot of different things can give us a sense of purpose, and having that persistent sense of purpose is the thing that really enriches our lives. It's funny. There's a meme that's been floating around the internet for years now. Um, Having this sense of purpose it shows up in different cultures and in different languages. Like the French call it raison d'être. In Japan, the word ikigai has been associated with it. And this meme that's been floating around the internet is really unfortunate because you may have seen this Venn diagram and say like ikigai is in the middle, and they say it's the intersection between what you're passionate about, um, what um, what you're I'm trying to remember the thing, but the overlay that's wrong about it is that like one of the circles in the Venn diagram is that it's also about what people value enough to pay you for. And that actually has nothing to do with ikigai, it has nothing to do with a sense of purpose, has nothing to do with your reason for being. It's beautiful when you can actually create work or say yes to work that gives you a sense of purpose. And then maybe that is the work that you do, the thing that you get paid for, and people value that highly, and you're well compensated for it. You can support yourself in the world, right? But what if you're a parent and that you derive tremendous sense of purpose from that, or a caretaker or a volunteer? There's so many different ways that we could show up, invest serious amounts of effort, and derive profound senses of purpose from it that have nothing to do with people paying you for it. Um, it's really just it's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, and makes you say yes, even if you know it's going to be really hard. And that can show up in so many different parts of life. So you know, you can find it in so many different ways if you're really open to it.
I
But what's central is that it matters. It matters that we feel it.
I love, Jonathan, all of these conversations around purpose, and I have never heard anyone so beautifully unpack it that this does not need to be tied to a monetary source. I think consumerism has us believing, to your point, that it needs to be tied to what people will pay you for, and there's a monetary value to it. You just unpack that beautifully. And I have to tell you, I have not shared this with you. You help me get out of this chatter and the chaos and the self-induced chaos and the checklists and the climbing up the ladder of I'll be happy when to find my own purpose. And that was when, oh my gosh, 7 years ago, talk about the building blocks and taking time. I took your Spark type test. And I knew it was going to be powerful, but I wasn't sure how. And it unpacked this beautiful thing that I never even knew about myself, on this desire to teach and to serve. And I would love for you, I've shared this test with so many people in my life. I would love for you to share with our listeners not only the Spark type test, but share with us the creation behind it and how this came to be out in the world.
Yeah, sure. So I've been on a decades long journey to really understand what it means to live a good life.
Mm,
Um, that has showed up in like study of academic literature, study of Eastern philosophy, a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different faith traditions, movement, psychology, and became elevated to really my profession a dozen years ago when we launched Good Life Project, which basically gave me, you know, a container to sit down with so many of the smartest people in the world and just pepper them with questions, and learn from them and study from them and devour just a mountain of writing, that condensed their research. And then in the middle of that, my mind really started to focus in on the domain of work, because for most of us, it's the thing that we do for the vast majority of our waking hours, for the vast majority of our lives. Um, and that, like these days, very few people actually like hit the magical age of 65 and retire. Most of us are going to be working until we either can't work anymore or we don't want to, but it's going to be a lot longer than that. And that's a tragedy if the thing that you do drains you on a daily
mm,
basis, but it's a blessing if the thing that you do fills you up on a daily basis. And I just start to get really curious, like, how do we actually tilt towards the latter and not the former? What goes into that? Like, what goes into filling what I would call our contribution buckets? Um, and there are a lot of different things that fill that bucket, from like shared values and culture and all these different things. but on a granular day-to-day level. I really got curious about what are the unique ways that we exert effort that give us a feeling of meaningfulness, a feeling of purpose, a feeling of energy and excitement, easier access to that blissed out state of flow where the world seems to drift away and you're in your absolute like zone, and a feeling of expressed potential where like we're bringing all of ourselves, our identity, our potential, our skills, our ability to whatever it is that we're doing. We feel fully expressed and not like we're hiding or stifled in any way. Like we're able to unlock all of that. And as I started thinking about, like the ways that we exert effort that give us that feeling, and I call that feeling, by the way, the confluence of those different things I just shared, feeling sparked, or oftentimes I use the word coming alive. Um, I started to wonder whether there's sort of like a universal set of impulses that exist in all human beings, um, to exert effort or to work hard that would give us that feeling. So literally, like that kicked into a research project for me that has been going on for many years now, where we just really started deconstructing pretty much every job that exists on any list, any industry list, um, and then teasing out what are the fundamental ways that people exert themselves. And you'd think that, well, there are something like 8 billion people on the planet. There've got to be like 8 billion unique impulses for effort that give us that feeling because we are all unique, special people. And we are all unique, special people. And at the same time, research distilled super quickly down from 8 billion to 10 distinct impulses for effort that give us that feeling of coming alive. And they exist in different blends in people. And what I start to realize once you identify these impulses is that wrapped around each one of them are a fairly common and identifiable set of behaviors, tendencies, and preferences that form archetypes. So we started calling them sparketypes because it was a fun shorthand for just the archetype for work that sparks you. And I started sharing them with people and getting like people were like, wow, this is really landing in a powerful way. It's resonant and it's helping me actually not only see and understand myself better, but make better decisions. And then we wanted to do two things. One, create a much more powerful research tool to get data at scale to really like both validate and understand these things. And also create a tool that anybody could actually interact with publicly and learn like what is my Sparketype profile. So we developed an assessment. Took about a year to do. We launched it. As we have this conversation, 800,000 plus people have completed it, generating a database of over 40 million data points. So we've got some really interesting data right now. We've done some follow-up research that actually shows strong correlations between doing the work of your Sparketype, especially what we call your primary Sparketype, which is sort of like your strongest impulse for work that makes you come alive. So we have like interesting data that says basically the more you do the work of your primary Sparketype in your work, the more likely you are to say that you feel a sense of meaningfulness and a sense of purpose, and that you're energized and excited, and that you get lost in flow with more ease and are more fully expressed. And also the opposite is true. The less likely, or the less that you say that the work of your Sparketype is integrated into your work, the less likely you are to actually feel all five of those different states. So, from the very early days of development, we continue to go deeper and deeper, deeper, and just the nuances and the development of the archetypes and the understanding of how these different things blend together and show up has gotten just stunningly, stunningly deep and rich. And, we could not have predicted that we would be deepening into this body of work at a time where a global pandemic would hit and it would completely rock the world of work, turn it upside down, have people at every level of work completely re-examining the way that they work, the way that they live, and um, people also en masse saying money isn't enough anymore. Meaning's got to be part of it. Purpose has got to be part of it. I need to wake up in the morning energized and excited to do this thing. It's not enough anymore just to put my head down, know that I'm going to get a paycheck, and then expect to actually quote live my life in the margins or someday when I retire. like this thing that I'm devoting myself to, it's got to give me more. And we just got very fortunate in that we had been developing this body of work for years before that, that speaks exactly to the needs of the moment. And it's like, it's an incredible blessing to be able to actually have tools and ideas and resources out and available to people at a moment where so many people are saying, okay, how do I do this thing called work and make it feel different than it's felt, and be able to look underneath or look beyond just jobs, roles, titles, companies, organizations, industries, and say, like, on a much deeper level, like on a source code level, what are the real drivers of the feeling that I yearn to feel? And then how can I deepen into that understanding and then look at the choices that I'm making in a work context and make better choices so that I feel more of those things.
Yes. And as you're sharing this, Jonathan and gang, I will link the link to the test. It's a free test. It is the most powerful 15 minutes that you can spend, my friend. It's quick, it's easy, and thank you for all of the work and the research. It's so powerful, and it's a way to unpack the things you can't see about yourself. And Jonathan, as you're sharing all of these things about the value of purpose, yes, and fulfillment, and it's not about the money, it's not about the title anymore. And I think COVID was such a beautiful gift, and it really cracked us open out of these exhaustion as a status symbol that we were living on to make it up the next air quote corporate ladder of success. And it makes me think of how you posted this amazing post on LinkedIn on the lack of ambition. It's not a lack of ambition. Do you remember the
Mm-hmm.
post?
Yeah.
Can you share it with our tribe? Because I thought it was so beautifully worded.
Yeah, one of the things that you hear, we do a bunch of work with organizations and leadership now, especially around all of these ideas. And even before we were doing this, like for literally the last decade, one of the laments that you would often hear from whether it's mid-level management, senior leadership, is that people just aren't ambitious anymore. And now, like since like the pandemic, you really hear that, like people like have completely lost their ambition. They don't want to quote come into work anymore. They don't want to work. And I think it's really silly because, and what I wrote in that post was that we're as ambitious as we ever were. It's just that we're ambitious for different things. We're ambitious for peace. We're ambitious for grace. We're ambitious for love. We're ambitious for space. We're ambitious for purpose, for meaning, for joy, for connection, for like mental well-being. We're ambitious to be treated with dignity. We're ambitious to actually show up and be seen. The ambition hasn't gone away. It's just shifted to core metrics that are much deeper to the way that we want to live our lives. So a lot of organizations are still measuring people's success within the organization by metrics that are based on organizational performance, deliverables, certain metrics. And when people are choosing to actually live good lives over that, um, then the organizations and leaders will sometimes say, well, they've lost their ambition because they're not actually striving to measure their lives on an individual level anymore based on the same metrics that organizations would measure a person's success within the organization. So there's a chasm that's emerged. And it's been really interesting to see that leaders and organizations who are actually understanding what's happening here and recognizing the chasm and realizing that it's not about waiting it out or finding like the random person that can step in and perform to the old metrics anymore. It's actually about meeting the moment and reimagining the way that they lead and manage and relate, and elevate and um, measure quote success within the organization. um, those leaders and teams and organizations, in my mind, are going to thrive. And we're seeing the early stages of that mightily. They will be the leaders of the next generation of their industries. Those who basically are trying to just retreat to the past and not actually understand the shift in ambition and then the yearning for people to measure their success in their lives with different metrics, they're really struggling right now. There is a lot of friction between leadership and sort of, like the those on teams within organizations, and um, there's a bit of a game of chicken happening right now, and there's an assumption that, like, people will eventually, quote, get back to the way things were. They'll realize that, this is just the way work is. um, I don't think they're going to. I think there has been a fairly permanent shift in what we're ambitious for. And again, not everybody. Like, there's some there are going to be outliers. There are going to be some people that are just like completely cool doing the way that things used to be. But a lot of people are not okay showing up and working, and being measured with the same set of expectations, because their own personal metrics for success in their own lives has permanently changed. And they need to see that reflected in the way that they step into a work environment too. So it's a really fascinating moment. And I think it's a really fertile moment for leadership who understands what's happening and is willing to respond by supporting the whole person. And they will then find employees and leaders within their organization who will stay with them for life, and do astonishing work. Like, not because some carrot or stick is involved in a motivational process, but because they're showing up, um, ignited to actually do the thing that allows them to not just feel good in the workplace, but live the life they want to live.
Yeah, that take me to church. Jonathan, for those of you who might not be watching us on video, I've had about so many. Yes, yes, standing up. Yes, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the courage to lean into your curiosities, for the decades worth of work that you have done to be such an inspiration to myself, to give me the courage to go on my own journey and listen to those inner gut whispers that are hard and scary as all hell, and come on and share with our community and in the work that you do. It is so powerful. And sometimes you can't see it when you're with the torch going through the cave, the dark wood in the night. So I want to thank you, thank you, thank you for being the amazing human that you are and sharing your work with the world. It is such a gift.
Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And y'all, I will link all of Jonathan's social feeds so you can follow him. His podcast, The Good Life Project. Oh, it is food for the soul. So I will link all of it so you can continue to follow Jonathan and let him spark you up the way that he has myself. Thank you again, my friend.
Pleasure.